Attention! The following video may contain fun, humor, profanity, personal opinions, political incorrectness, and so on. If you are under the age of 18 or are easily offended by something as simple as gendered words, then I suggest you turn this video off and watch something more suited to you. Something like Sesame Street. Don't say I didn't warn you.
How dare you!
G'day guys, welcome back to the channel, and welcome to those that are possibly clicking on this video for the first time. Today's video is going to be a little bit different from what I've been usually doing. As you can see, we're in my shed, and this video, if you haven't figured out from the title, is all about model airplane maintenance. So a couple of months back I did, it was probably more than a couple of months, anyway, a couple of months back I did a video on model helicopter maintenance and what I do personally to maintain a helicopter. This one's on model airplanes, and I thought it's actually something fitting because no matter what kind of radio controlled hobby you're into, maintenance is something important. Like a real car or a real aircraft, maintenance is required to keep whatever it is going, and the same applies to anything that's radio control, whether it's cars, planes, helicopters, you name it. So this video is going to be aimed at the newcomer, and it's very fitting for the aircraft that I have here because it's a trainer aircraft that I'm going to be going over. So we're going to cut to the bench and I'll explain what we're going to be doing. Okay guys, so we have here a Seagull Models Boomerang 2. Now, this isn't my model aircraft. This actually, officially belongs to the Model Aircraft Club that I'm a member of. However, this aircraft used to belong to a club member who can't fly nitro-powered models anymore due to physical injury, and so flying electric models is a little bit easier for him. So he kindly donated this model to the club, and it's actually just been sitting in the clubhouse for over a year, and as you can no doubt see, it's got some muck and dirt on it. So I decided I'll take this home and give it a clean, and I thought that this would be a good time to go over the model and do a video on maintenance. Now, this model, like I said, with anything, any model requires maintenance, and I know with this model, it has seen some flights and it has seen some carnage. Back here, the whole tail end came off, has been rebuilt, and the nose wheel, or the nose landing gear, has had a few nose dives, and the wings got some hanger rash on it. So one of the things we need to look for is parts that are stressed, like stress fractures and things like that. But what we're going to do first is we're going to clean this up. I'm going to give the engine a bit of a clean too. It's got some muck on it, so some brake cleaner will get all that muck off. And as you can see too guys, she got some cobwebs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some rags, give it a bit of a clean, and then we're going to go from there. Alright guys, so giving it a bit of a clean up. I know some of you are probably thinking just polishing a turd, but I mean, this aircraft has seen a lot of action. I mean, like I said, this model belonged to a club member and I taught him to fly, and we actually dubbed this thing Old Lucky, because seriously, it should not actually survive. It should have died a long time ago. So, but as you can see, like, the covering's faded and so forth, but I guess it adds to the charm. But this model has seen a lot of flights, so I've cleaned it up, cleaned the wing. So what we're going to do is, one of the first things we're going to do is check the fuel lines. So I'm going to just quickly take this off. Alright, so this just comes off, no problem at all. And I do recall that the fuel tubing was changed not long ago. Or when I say not long ago, not long before he donated it to the club. And if we just take out some of the foam here. And there we have it, guys. We got some old fuel. So that's just been sitting in the tank for over a year, which is not good. So the tank hasn't been drained properly. So what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to try my best to drain this tank out, and then I'll come back and we'll inspect it. Alright, just before I take the tank out, I managed to drain a majority of the fuel. Now, the fuel, because I remember I made fuel for this fella, and to give you an idea, that's the color of the fuel that I make. So the mix that I make, it's 20% oil, so it's 15% synthetic and 5% castor oil, so it has that kind of bluey green tinge to it. So that's what the fuel should look like. That's the fuel in there, guys. As you can see, it has gone off to almost a dark British racing green black color. That's what happens when you leave fuel in your model for an excessive amount of time, because you got to remember the fuel tank. So even though it's got a carby cap on it, you got the open vent open from the exhaust, so air can go in, and that's what happens to methanol based fuels. It goes off like that, and so is the castor oil. So that there is some exceptional weed killer. So guys, just a little pro tip: never leave fuel in your tank in your model aircraft or your car. Alright guys, so I've got the fuel tank out. So one of the things we need to look for is the condition of the fuel tubing. So, as unlike with a car, where, well, generally you should drain the tank as you should with the model aircraft, quite often there'll still be a little bit of fuel left in the tank, and if you're flying regularly, it doesn't really matter. But if you're leaving it for a long period of time, like this model is sat for, it's good to, the fuel will attack parts of the tank and the fuel system. So what you want to do is check your fuel line. I've actually just put this on because the other bit was a bit too short and there was a few little issues with it, and one of those issues were little split ends, so I had to replace it. So you want to look at the fuel tubing, and if you've got clear fuel tubing like this, what you can do is you can like plug with it still in the tank, you can plug it and then blow into it, and what that does is that'll pressurize it. And what you can do is two things: you can put some like dishwashing soap over the fuel tubing, or you can put it under in like a sink full of water and have it submerged, and as you're blowing into it you look for air bubbles. So at the moment this is all fine, so I'm going to put the tank back together and reinstall it, and then we'll go on to the next part. Okay, so got the tank reinstalled. I've checked the fuel lines. I have had to replace this line here for the remote needle. So notice there was a bit of it looked a little bit meh, so better to be safe than sorry. I replaced that. So next thing we move on to now is the structural rigidity of the aircraft. Now this is a model, as I've mentioned a couple of times in this video, is very old and has seen quite a bit of action. So when you're looking over a model, look at things like the formers along here. Look for things like, is it separated? Does it need to be re-glued? Is it weak? Is it like, for instance, here you can see how a bit of the wood has splintered a little bit. You look at that and you think, okay, does it need a bit of bracing? What I might do is off camera, I'm gonna just get a bit of wood and just make a little cutout just to go across there, just as a bit of a structural for a bit of structural rigidity, just in case. Look at things like, are the servos moving? Now that carburetor seems to be a little bit locked up, so I'm going to have a look at, I'm going to address that a little bit later. Other things, you know, do the control surfaces move? And that seems to be working. So the servos aren't bound up. However, it does seem like there's a little bit of muck in the carburetor, which I will rectify shortly. So another thing to look for with this particular model, it has wing bolts. So you have where you have the wing bolts go through here. Have a feel. Is it loose? And inspect down in here. Have a feel of the formers down in there if you can. See if they're loose, if it needs to be re-glued. Other things you might want to look for, okay, for instance, is the wiring frayed? Now you might be asking, how can the wiring be frayed? For this, like I said, this model has been sitting in the clubhouse for over a year. Now, here in Australia, I live out in the country area, we had a mouse plague. And mice and rats and oh, God knows what was getting everywhere. Check the wiring. Is the have the mice been getting into the wiring? Have they been chewing on it? You know, is there any issues with the wiring? Have a look at the receiver. Is the antenna in place and is it in one piece? These are things you need to have a look at, especially if you haven't touched a model for a long time. So these are little things you need to look for, especially if you've been through a mouse plague like we have here in regional Australia. So the next part is, if you know the model has had damage, we need to inspect it. So as I've mentioned, this whole tail section here of the model came off, and I wasn't there to witness it. However, I was told that the landing was pretty spectacular, and it has been repaired. And I know for a fact that it still flies because I test flew it after the repair. So what we want, but since it has been sitting, we want to check to see if there's any weakness. So what I'm going to do here, guys, I'm just going to put the camera down and just bear with me. So when you're looking at it, just feel around, give it a squeeze, and I know where he's repaired it, because there's where there are holes along here for like the shape of the airframe. I know he's added wood in here, so just give it a squeeze, and if it feels good, there's no movement, then it should be fine. But and this is why you have a feel. And I can tell that this is fine. There is movement in here, that is normal. You got to expect that from a balsa model. Now, so that's fine there. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take this off the table. I'm going to put the main wing on, and we will continue with that, with what to do next. Alright guys, so now we have the main wing here. Now, one of the main things we need to look for, apart from the obvious such as holes in the covering, we need to look for weaknesses in the wing. And this is kind of the same process as before. So as you as you go over it, just push down on certain areas. So around here there's a bit of sheeting. You probably can't you probably see it in the camera, but this is where there are open holes where there's no wood. You just got the ribs of the wing. When you're inspecting it, just push down on the wood here on the leading edge, see if there's any weak spots. And I mean, this model has been, I mean, apart from some hanger rash and some sketchy landings, this model has been looked after, apart from the fuel. But another thing to look for too is the join in the wing. Now it's a bit hard here because there's the included tape that it comes with, but you want to check to see if the glue is still holding. So what I'll do is I'll just put this camera, sorry if it's a bit shaky fellas, but okay, so you'll want to put the wing under a little bit of tension, just see if there's any cracking noises, and you can't hear any cracking noises. So that join is still mint, and it should, yeah, just going over it and just checking the wood and so forth. There's no cracking or anything. So I mean, apart from it looking apart from the hanger rash and some sketchy landings, the wing is actually still in good condition. I will, however, I just noticed here, I may put a little bit of glue just along here, because with this wing, as you can see, it has a dihedral to it, and they give you a flat piece of ply for mounting the servo. So I might just put a little bit of epoxy, 5-minute epoxy in there, just to add a little bit of strength to it. It's probably not necessary, but better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it, especially when you're mid-air. So that's fine. Now the next thing we're going to have a look at is the control surfaces. So the control surfaces, I'm just going to do this on the wing because I have it in my hand right now, and this is relative for the main wing, and like for your ailerons and for your elevator and your rudder. So you want to check to make sure that there is no binding, so I'll just move the servo. That's moving nicely. And we'll have a look at the next one here. It's a bit hard to do this on camera, but you can see it's moving nicely. Now, next part of looking at for your control surfaces are the hinges. Now, this model uses proper like Dubro style hinges, where it's two bits of plastic joined together with a pin. However, some models have a plastic fiberglass reinforced hinge. So what you would want to do, and I know also from the fact that with these models, apart from the hinges being glued in, they actually have pins going through, so you can't actually see the pins because they're recessed in. But where you say you have a hinge here, hinge here, hinge here, and hinge here, while they're glued in, there are small pins that go through the wood and hold the hinges in place. But if you have a model that doesn't have this, what you should do is get your fingers in there and pull. Put some decent amount of pressure on it, and see if it pops out. Because what can happen, and I have seen it happen in flight, where the gluing of the hinge wasn't done properly, and what was it? Was it the elevator or the rudder or the aileron? I think it was the aileron. One of the ailerons came off mid-flight. Fortunately, there was the other one, so it was still flyable and could be controlled. However, it was sketchy. However, it wasn't glued properly, and the aileron came out. So this is why you just check it, give it some tension. And the same applies to your elevator and your rudder. Put a bit of tension on there, see if you can pull it out, because trust me guys, you don't want this to happen during a flight. So that's the next part. Now we'll go on to the engine now. Alright guys, so we're having a look at the engine now. So I have cleaned this up, as you can see from my dirty hands. I have cleaned this up a little bit. It had some old fuel and that, with the oil had caked on to the outside. There was a bit of muck around the carb. However, I have noticed, oops, damn it, I'll get that later. I have noticed though that the carburetor is jammed. So one of the things we should look at is if the engine, for starters, is the engine turning over, and this is turning over nicely. It's got compression, so that's fine. But as I just mentioned, the carburetor isn't moving, so it needs to be freed. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pause it here and take the carb off, and we're going to go from there, guys. Okay, so I have the carb off, and as you can see, there is no movement. So what I need to do is to give this a clean, so that will mean I'll have to disassemble it. So when you're disassembling something, always take a mental note of what part goes where and so forth. So I'm going to do this off camera, but I will explain the process. So basically just take every screw off, and what I'm going to do, fortunately with this carb there's not a lot of moving parts in it. Make note too, as you can see there's an O-ring here. Depending on the model you have, like particular engine you have, make sure the O-ring's still there. So take your parts out, and it's evident that the barrel is stuck, that's inside the carb. So what I'm going to have to do is soak it probably with a mix of WD-40 and some transmission fluid, and that'll help free it up. So yeah, just bear with me guys, I'll be back, and hopefully with the magic of video editing we'll have a moving carb. Alrighty guys, so as you can see now the carb is back in place. There was a fair bit of muck, like old castor oil that had gummed up and glued the barrel to the actual housing of the carb itself. But as you can see, we have a nice moving carburetor, and I also made sure that the the jets, I guess you call it, they're all cleaned and that, so that's all nice and clean. So as you can see guys, there's not a lot that needs to be done to a model airplane. A lot of it is preventative maintenance, other is just wear and tear. So what we're going to do now, got to check the glow plug, make sure that's working nicely. So what's next now is just to put a bit of fuel in it and give it a hit, see how we go. Alright guys, got the model facing in a little bit. I have it anchored down outside. It's just blowing an absolute gale, and it's a very light model, so I don't want this thing getting tipped over while I'm trying to start it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the camera down here and make sure it's in shot, and I'm just going to give it a mild start, quick start. I'm not using radio at the moment, it's not really necessary. First of all, just give it a quick prime. So open throttle. Oh yeah. Alright, it's getting fuel into it. Now we'll just bring it back, pinch. Alright, I might just bring this over here. Alright. Now, this might make some noise, it may not. We will see. I expected that would happen. You know, hasn't been started in over a year. Carby was seized, and fuel tubing was parts of it was perished and split. So I'm going to call that a success, guys. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to bind this to my radio, and we're going to see if it flies.
first time it's flown since you've done it?